They said space was for everyone, a shared inheritance among civilizations, peaceful, unified, enlightened. That was before the Terran exclusion zone lit up on every galactic star map like a red skull warning pirates away from cursed waters. And it wasn't a hollow threat. Any species, ship, or probe that crossed the invisible line never came back. No signals, no bodies. Just silence. I remember the first time I saw it. The map in the council chamber had it marked in blood-red arcs, pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat warning against trespass. I was a diplomatic attaché back then, serving under the Velkai emissary. They called it a human ghost zone, a scar on the map. But we knew better. The humans weren't dead. They were waiting. My name is Commander Bram Halden, former Earthborn fleet. Former because Earth doesn't have fleets anymore. We don't need them. Not after what happened in the year of the betrayal. See, it started like most tragedies do, in peace. The humans had just joined the Galactic Union, idealistic fools. We shared tech, culture, even blood. They gave their trust, and in return the other species gave them chains. It was slow at first. Trade deals that bled Earth dry, patents that enslaved Terran innovation, alien corporations mining the asteroid belt, leaving our own citizens jobless, treaties rewritten mid-negotiation, 1,000 tiny paper cuts until humanity bled dignity. But the final blow? The Treaty of Goran's Hollow. They called it a security measure. They said Earth's primitive aggression needed containment. What they really meant was they feared us. And fear makes cowards do ugly things. They took our colonies, declared Mars a neutral resource hub, then deployed Vec-class harvesters and left the settlements to rot. They dismantled our navy in the name of peace. And then, they came for the children. No one talks about Project Sanctum now, buried in classified archives. But I was there. I saw the abductions, the experiments, our children taken to rehabilitation centers for xenosympathetic conditioning. Indoctrination camps, really, designed to breed the human out of humans. We begged the council, pleaded for justice. But all we got was silence. The same kind of silence that now echoes from every ship that dares cross into Terran space. Then came the burn. The day Earth went dark. Entire planet cloaked under a blackout field. No communications, no signals, not even a distress beacon, just gone. And when the council sent a fleet to investigate, it vanished too. That was 10 years ago. I've lived long enough to hear the rumors, theories, lies. They say Earth turned savage, that humanity is extinct, that a virus wiped them out. But they're all wrong. I know the truth, because I've seen them. I escaped the council 6 years ago, fled with a stolen freighter, crossed into the exclusion zone knowing full well it could be suicide. But I had to know what happened. I had to see it for myself. I expected to find ruins, ash, maybe even those black flags the radicals used to wave. Instead, I found something far worse. I found order, discipline, evolution. The humans hadn't disappeared. They had prepared. And now, they were watching. The moment I crossed the invisible line into Terran space, I expected death. A flash of light, a cold void. Maybe something worse. That's what they tell you outside the exclusion zone, that humans have automated defense grids designed to reduce anything to atoms before it finishes a sentence. But that didn't happen. Instead, nothing did. No alarms, no scans, no missiles, just eerie silence stretching across the stars. The only thing louder than that silence was the pounding in my chest. I piloted the freighter, a rusting heap I'd stolen from a Vossian scrapyard, slow and steady, holding my breath. My nav console flickered with warning lights, none of which meant a damn thing out here. Every system I relied on, galactic positioning, council beacon net, standard tracking, dropped dead the second I crossed the threshold. It was like entering another reality. What replaced them was different. There were frequencies in the background, faint but deliberate, not natural static. These were organized, patterned, almost like music, but it wasn't for me. It felt like I was being studied, not scanned, watched, judged. 2 hours in, I thought I'd made it. Thought the old stories were just that, stories, until something appeared outside my window. It didn't come on sensors, nothing lit up. It was just there, a ship. Human-made, no doubt. Black as void, built in angles that made your eyes ache to look at them too long. No running lights, no markings, just a sleek predator sitting quietly beside me like a shark, deciding if you were worth chewing. It didn't hail me. Didn't respond when I broadcast a standard greeting. It just followed. Every move I made, it mirrored with surgical precision. I accelerated. It matched. I dropped to sublight. It coasted beside me like we were dancing. No threats, no weapons, just quiet dominance. And then it vanished. Not with a jump. Not with a burn. It just blinked out. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with the humans I remembered. These weren't diplomats and dreamers, not scientists or traders. These were ghosts wrapped in iron. Children raised by betrayal and built for vengeance. A few days later, I lost track of time inside the zone. I found Earth. Not the planet itself. Not yet. But a relay station, orbiting some no-name moon between the old Mars trade route and the Belt's edge. It looked abandoned. Scorched metal, shattered windows, debris floating like bones in water. I approached with caution. Docked manually. Systems resisted at first, but then something let me in. Like it wanted me there. Inside, it was dark. Not the usual emergency darkness, but something colder. As if even light was afraid to stay too long. I walked through corridors filled with echoes. Rusted signs still bore the old Terran Alliance logos, forgotten emblems of a proud species once welcomed into the stars. Consoles were ripped apart, screens cracked, but something about the place felt alive. Not in the physical sense, more like it was remembering me. Then came the voice. Male. Calm. Unmistakably human. You shouldn't have come. I froze, spun around. Nothing. The voice didn't come through my comms. It was in the room. I'm not here to harm, I said, raising my hands. I'm Bram Halden, former Earthborn. I know who you are. The air felt heavier. You were there during the evacuation of Europa Colony. You smuggled children off-world during the purge. I did what I could, I said, heart thudding. I thought everyone else was gone. I thought humanity was dead. There was a pause. Then the voice replied, lower, bitter. Humanity was dead. What you see now is something else. The lights snapped on, one by one, leading me down a corridor. I followed. What else could I do? The path led me to a chamber that looked like an old operations center. In the middle sat a chair, and in it a man. He looked almost normal. Pale skin, short black hair, worn jumpsuit. But his eyes weren't right. They were too steady, too cold. Like he'd seen too much to ever blink again. You're lucky, he said. We usually shoot first. I'm not here to spy, I said. I left the council. I've seen what they did. I came looking for answers. And now you have them. Leave. No. That made him twitch. I stepped forward. I didn't cross half the galaxy to turn back empty. I know what they did to us. The treaties, the betrayals, the children. I lived it. But this silence, the ghost stories, it's not enough. They think you're gone. I want them to know you're not. He stood. Slowly. Why? Because I'm tired of their lies, I said. Because they made us weak, and we paid in blood. And because if anyone deserves fear, it's them. That finally cracked something in him. A small smile, cold and knowing. You're not the first to come here like that. Few of you leave, fewer still survive. But maybe you're the kind who needs to see it for himself." He tapped a panel. A hidden door slid open. Bright light poured through. "Welcome to Bastion," he said. "The last city of Earth." What I saw on the other side shattered everything I thought I knew. Earth wasn't dead, it was reborn. Massive towers rose from scorched plains, machines unlike anything I'd seen, flying without thrusters, construction bots moving like insects across an artificial skyline. No civilians, just soldiers, engineers, builders, all moving with purpose. It was a fortress, a machine city, built for war. I was led through winding corridors beneath the city, deep underground where the old Earth governments once hid bunkers and research labs. Now repurposed into something new. They called it the Crucible. Here they trained the next generation, not with lectures or soft words, but with pain, drills, combat simulations. Children of war, bred not for peace, but survival. One room showed teens dissecting alien weapons. Another had augmented troops running zero-G combat drills. And in every corner, old human war banners hung beside the symbol of a black gauntlet crushing a council sigil. "What is this?" I asked. The man who guided me didn't answer right away. He just looked over the expanse and said, "Insurance." "We're coming back," he added after a pause. "Not to negotiate, not to beg. We've had our time in chains. Now it's their turn to learn what fear tastes like." "But why wait?" He glanced at me with a hard stare. "Because we're not done evolving. And because the longer they think we're ghosts, the louder they scream when we finally return." He showed me one last thing before I left. A chamber beneath the Crucible, containing a sphere, pulsing with raw energy. I didn't know what it was, but I knew enough to be afraid. "That's not a bomb," he said. "It's worse." "What is it?" "Our voice," he replied. "When the time comes, it speaks first." As I boarded my ship to leave, I realized something horrifying. The Council hadn't just created enemies when they betrayed Earth. They had forged predators. And soon, every species that watched humans burn without lifting a hand would understand exactly why no one enters human space anymore. Because next time, we won't wait for them to come to us. I left Bastion with more than just answers. I left with a curse. Something about that place had imprinted itself on me. Maybe it was the silence, the unnatural order, or the eyes of those young recruits, burning not with hope, but with cold, trained fury. Whatever it was, it followed me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that black gauntlet crushing the symbol of the Galactic Council. Not as propaganda, but as prophecy. The journey back to the edge of Terran space was a blur. My freighter moved on auto, but my mind stayed buried in what I'd seen. Earth hadn't just survived the betrayal, it had weaponized it. And what scared me most wasn't their technology, it was their patience. The Council had stripped them of allies, identity, even freedom. But instead of collapsing, humanity had distilled every ounce of that pain into something focused. Something that no alien species, not even the advanced ones like the Voss or the Ureth, had ever developed. Resentment born from moral clarity. I made contact with an old comrade once I crossed back into the neutral corridor, Soren Drek, a half-retired mercenary who owed me for saving his neck during the Vakari riots. He met me in a rundown orbital station called Shell 7, just outside Goran's reach. I thought he'd changed. He hadn't. The first thing he did when I docked was draw a weapon on me. "I thought you were dead," he growled. "Or worse, converted." "Nice to see you too," I said, not even flinching. "Put the gun down, Drek." "I've seen worse things than you lately." He narrowed his eyes. "You went in, didn't you?" I nodded. Slowly. He exhaled and finally holstered the weapon. "Then you're dumber than you look. They're not gone, Soren. They're waiting. And what they've built, it's beyond anything we imagined. He sat, poured 2 glasses of some chemical excuse for whiskey, and stared at me in silence. I always said the Council would regret what they did to Earth, he muttered, but I figured we had time. We don't. I slid him a data shard, encrypted, fragmented, but it held enough. Images of Bastion, the Crucible, that weaponized sphere they called the Voice. He scanned it, jaw tightening. You know what this means, right? If the Council finds out you brought this back, they won't, not yet. Not yet? He snapped. You planning on telling them? I plan on choosing who deserves the warning. He laughed bitterly. Still a bleeding idealist, Bram? Even after everything? Number, I'm something worse now. I understand. We spent the next 2 days hiding in that orbiting dump, decrypting more of the data I'd brought. Some of it was fragmented AI code. Other parts were doctrine, training logs, psychological conditioning programs, defense stratagems that made even Soren, a man who had seen war since childhood, shake his head in disbelief. They've turned war into a language, he said, and they're fluent. But the shard held something else. A list, not of enemies, of traitors, names, species, individuals, some in the Council, some in high corporate orbitals, others living quietly in exile, thinking their hands were clean. They weren't. You know what this is? I asked Soren. A death list, he said flatly. I nodded, and I think they're starting to check names off. He stared at me, then leaned in close. You want to warn them? No, I said. I want to use them. You're insane. Maybe, but you and I both know the Council won't listen until their towers start crumbling. So we use their own fear. We leak just enough, show them ghosts are real, force them into panic, and in the chaos, we choose who burns. Soren grinned. Now that's the Bram I remember. It didn't take long to get the first reaction. 2 weeks after the shard leak, a Urith diplomat was found murdered in her own compound. Not just killed, displayed, stripped, skinned, hung above her own species' flag with the words, "You watched them suffer," carved into her chest. The Council called it terrorism, said the humans were acting from the shadows. But I knew better. It wasn't a message, it was a receipt. More followed. A Vossian warlord mysteriously died aboard his command vessel. No breach, no poison. Just dead. Every organ ruptured from within like his body imploded. A message was scrawled into the bulkhead with his own blood. This is justice. Soon, rumors spread faster than facts. Stations abandoned. Freighters reported sightings of human ships with no registration, no comms, just silent shadows in space. Some were never seen again. Panic gripped the outer systems. The Council convened an emergency summit. I wasn't invited, obviously, but I was watching. From a hidden orbital relay, I intercepted chatter. They were cracking, accusing each other, falling back into the same tribal paranoia that had made them betray Earth in the first place. It was working, but that wasn't the part that shook me. It was when one of the Council aides whispered something during a private comm, something that wasn't meant for the record. "We made a mistake," she said. "We thought we were taming beasts, but we were burying gods." And I knew then, it wasn't just revenge that Bastion wanted. It was a reckoning, a reshaping of the galactic order, and they wouldn't stop until every lie, every chain, every smug alien empire that once looked down on Earth had been reduced to dust. I asked Soren one night, over a bitter drink, "You think they'll win?" He took a long drag of a vapor stick and said, "They already have." Why? Because fear isn't about strength. It's about belief. And right now, every species out there believes humans are monsters, silent, calculating, and ready to unleash hell. And what if they're wrong? He smiled grimly. Then they'll die afraid anyway. I left Shell 7 with a new mission. Not to warn, not to save, but to watch. To move between the cracks, follow the list, and see just how far humanity was willing to go. I'd once thought betrayal had broken us, but now I saw it clearly. Betrayal hadn't broken humanity, it had purified it. The list didn't lie. 3 names down, 22 left. And the silence between each strike was worse than the act itself. That was the genius of Bastion's strategy. They didn't broadcast, didn't gloat. No war declarations or peace ultimatums, just quiet execution. Surgical, untraceable. Each move designed to make the next one inevitable. The galaxy wasn't at war yet, but the war had already begun. I found the 4th name in the dirty back alleys of Chira's Drift, a commerce moon built like a hive, all stacked slums and black market tech vendors, stinking of grease, neon smoke, and the desperate sweat of 10,000 species trading sins. His name was Karnos Yev, Ureth, once a senior logistics officer during the Trade Suppression Accords. Back then, he signed the order that rerouted vital Terran food supplies to friendlier colonies. Earth lost 7 million to starvation that year. Quiet genocide under the name of economic correction. Now he ran a security firm. Fat, comfortable, untouchable. At least that's what he thought. I tracked him for 2 days, watched his routines. He traveled light with 2 personal guards, both cyber-modded and smug, probably ex-military turned corporate muscle. They were good, but not Bastion good. I knew I wasn't the one meant to kill him. I wasn't part of Bastion's elite. I was just an old soldier carrying ghosts. But someone was here. I could feel it, smell it in the air, like the moment before a storm hits metal. It happened on the 3rd night. Karnos was drinking in some velvet-lit lounge, draped in synthetic females, and puffing on imported vapor leaves like a man who thought the past had forgotten him. That's when the lights cut. Not all at once. Just his booth. And then the sound. A scream. But not his. One of the girls slumped forward, blood leaking from her ears. Dead. The second tried to run. Didn't make it 2 steps before collapsing like a puppet with its strings sliced. The guards rose, weapons drawn, but there was no target. No gunfire, just death. Karnos stood, trembling. "Who's there?" he barked. "Who dares?" A whisper came from behind him. No one saw who said it. "You watched them starve." He turned, but there was no one. Then his body convulsed. Hard, violent, like something inside him wanted out. He dropped to his knees, coughing, retching, before vomiting black blood onto the white marble floor. The crowd screamed. Someone called security, but by the time they arrived, he was gone. Not just dead, emptied, eyes hollow, tongue missing, and in its place, carved into his chest with precision, "Your hunger fed our fire." They left the body untouched, because everyone knew now what it meant. Another name off the list. I left the drift immediately. My face was too known. The whispers had started again. The humans are back. They're killing us one by one. It wasn't fear anymore. It was acceptance. Whole sectors began withdrawing from council control. Trade halted. Ambassadors were recalled. Non-human species who'd once lorded over Terrans now treated human-shaped shadows as death incarnate. Every flicker of movement became a threat. Every human vessel, no matter how old or broken, was seen as a warship in disguise. I traveled next to the Halmar Fringe, a cluster of forgotten mining worlds run by corporate slavers. That's where I found another ghost. She didn't give a name, just an alias. Wraith. She was Bastion-born, trained in the Crucible, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. Not modified, not robotic, perfected. She moved like a thought, soundless, invisible, watched me for hours before speaking. Her first words chilled my blood. You followed the list. I didn't deny it. I needed to see. Now you've seen. Why tell me anything? Because your voice still carries, because you remember pain. And you want me to spread fear? She tilted her head, something almost human in the gesture. Fear spreads itself. You're just the wind that fans the fire. I asked her about the plan, about the end game. She didn't flinch. There's no end. There's only balance. We remove what tipped the scales, and when the ashes settle, they'll rebuild in our image. Vengeance isn't justice. No, she said quietly. It's better. I should have been afraid of her. Maybe I was. But more than that, I was convinced. Not because she spoke like a zealot, but because everything she said had already been proven. Every corpse on that list, every scream from the council chambers, was evidence. I remembered Earth the way it used to be. Loud, wild, fractured. We weren't perfect. We bled each other more than we bled others. But at least we bled honestly. Now, we didn't bleed at all. We made others do it for us. The fifth name died days later. He was no one special. A bureaucrat, a paper pusher. But he'd once signed off on a prison satellite where Terran protesters were experimented on with psychic dampening tech. Rumors said some of them still screamed in the void. He was found floating outside his station. No breach, no suit, just floating. Naked. Frozen and grinning. No one ever found the breach in his station's hull, because there wasn't one. That was the pattern now. Impossibility, killings that defied explanation, murder as message, as performance, as warning. The council stopped pretending. They issued an emergency decree. All humans currently outside the exclusion zone were to be detained or expelled. Some fought back. Some disappeared before the order could reach them. I knew this would only feed the fire. Bastion didn't need more enemies. It just needed the illusion that everyone was already guilty. And guilt was a heavy thing in this galaxy. By the time we hit name 7, I started feeling it myself. Not guilt, not shame. Purpose. I'd spent years drifting, trying to forget the war, trying to find some place where the betrayal didn't burn every time I blinked. But now I had a direction again. A storm to ride. And I was done waiting. I reached out to Wraith again. This time I had a name for her. A target. One not on the official Bastion list, but someone who'd slipped through the cracks. A name I remembered too well. Admiral Vern Ekris. He'd been the one who ordered my squad into the ice fields of Europa without backup. Said it was low priority. Half my men died freezing. The rest bled out after we were ambushed. No medals, no funerals, just forgotten graves buried beneath corporate reports. She didn't hesitate. Where? Gavros Prime, retired, living in luxury. Then he dies slow. I didn't ask what she meant. I just watched as she walked into the shadows and felt the galaxy grow one shade darker. I didn't sleep the night before it happened. Not because of guilt. That died the day Earth went dark. It was something else. Something colder. A pulse under my skin. Like I could feel it coming. Like the galaxy itself held its breath, waiting for the next act of judgment. Admiral Vern Ekris wasn't just a name on a file. He was my ghost. 2 decades ago, he stood in front of a council hearing and justified sending my entire squad into the Europa sinkhole without support. Tactical containment, he called it. Expendable assets with a low probability of strategic success. We were Terran Marines, the last loyal unit before the disarmament. And to him, we were paperwork. The few of us who survived that frozen hell were scattered, discharged, forgotten. I carried the scars in my bones. I still limped in the rain, still coughed blood on cold mornings. He retired with honors, built a mansion on Gavros Prime, lived surrounded by exotic servants, antique war medals, and the smug security of being part of the winning side. Wraith called it Cleansing Day. She said Bastian had been watching Ekris for months, waiting. "You gave us the location," she told me. "So this one is yours to witness." She didn't offer me a weapon. She didn't have to. This wasn't my kill, it was his sentence. We touched down on Gavros Prime under forged diplomatic codes. The planet's skies were sterile blue, its cities lined with polished marble and fountains that sang lullabies in 5 languages. A haven for the old elite, the war profiteers, the architects of betrayal. They built paradise from the bones of the conquered. His estate stood on a cliffside like a crown, watched over by automated drones and private security. I expected trouble, resistance. I got silence. Wraith walked ahead of me, cloaked in shadows, unarmed, but more dangerous than an entire armory. Her eyes scanned everything but settled on nothing. She was already inside the kill. We entered through the main gate. No alarms, no response. The guards didn't move, because they were already dead. One sat slumped over a console, eyes glassed, lips parted mid-sentence. The other lay against the wall, expression frozen in surprise. No blood, no sign of struggle. "They never saw it coming," she said. We moved through the estate like ghosts. The walls were covered in paintings, abstract pieces from a dozen cultures Ekris helped pillage. A Ureth sunstorm canvas, a Vicari flame sculpture, even an old Terran oil painting, probably stolen during the lootings. The irony made me sick. Wraith found him in his study. Alive. For now. He was seated in a recliner, watching old footage on a projection wall. His own speeches, war medals, younger versions of himself shaking hands with council delegates and smiling through thin lies. He didn't look surprised to see us. "I was wondering when they'd come," he said softly, without turning. Wraith didn't speak. She just circled behind him, standing like a silent reaper in human form. I stepped forward. "Vern Ekris," he smiled, still facing the screen. "Bram Halden. You were one of mine, weren't you? Europa, yes? I watched men die in -50 storms because you needed a distraction on another front," I said. "You fed us to ghosts." He nodded. "Yes, I did." He didn't flinch, didn't beg. "You think your honesty buys you mercy?" I asked. "No," he said. "But perhaps understanding." That made me laugh, not because it was funny, but because the man actually believed it. "I understood the second I walked into Bastion," I said. "I understood what you and the Council created." He turned slowly, eyes meeting mine. They were old, clouded, but not afraid. "I gave you clarity," he said. "Purpose. Before the betrayal, humans were soft, fragmented, petty. It was our betrayal that made you this. You should thank me." Wraith stepped forward, and I finally saw her face in full light. Young, barely 30, but her eyes were ancient, eyes that had seen death and found purpose in it. She knelt beside Ekris, reached into a satchel and pulled out a small device. A sphere, metallic, glowing faintly blue. His breath hitched. "You know what this is?" she asked. He nodded. "Neural stinger." "No," she said coldly. "It's history. Yours." She pressed it to his temple. The device activated instantly. Lights flared. His body stiffened. And then he began to speak. Not words, confessions, every order, every decision, every lie. The device was ripping the memories from him, forcing him to relive them aloud. He screamed, not in pain, but in despair, because he was remembering who he really was. He cried out names, places, projects long buried, At one point, he begged someone named Marek to stop, probably a subordinate who died decades ago. He sobbed, and then he went quiet. Dead. Wraith removed the device and stood. "Why?" I asked. "Because the galaxy needs receipts," she said, "not just bodies." We left the estate untouched. By morning, the confession had already leaked. Bastion's networks were precise. Select council members woke to the full file in their private comms. Some denied it. Others went silent. A few tried to run. None succeeded. Gavros Prime went into lockdown, claiming an unknown terrorist cell had struck. The media called it an isolated incident. But no one believed it. Not anymore. The body count was too specific. The messages too pointed. Everyone with blood on their hands began sleeping with one eye open. And that's when the council made its first public mistake. They retaliated, a joint strike on a human freighter that had crossed into neutral space. 5 Terrans dead, all civilians, claimed to be insurgents. The next day, the Gavari embassy on Joran Prime exploded, leveled in one blast. No trace of the attacker, no message this time. None was needed. The war had officially begun, not with fleets or invasions, but with a whisper that bled into a scream. And the galaxy finally understood. No species enters human space. Not because we won't let them, but because they might not come back whole. Or worse, come back knowing what they truly did. War doesn't begin with a bang. Not anymore. It starts with hesitation. Missed calls. Nervous glances during council meetings. A fleet that doesn't respond to a distress signal. A senator who suddenly falls silent in the middle of a speech when the lights flicker. Because now everyone watches the shadows, not the stars. I watched from the edges. The kill list was more than half complete now. 12 names silenced. Half a dozen more vanished. Runaways who knew they were next, but had nowhere left to run. Their wealth couldn't shield them. Their titles meant nothing. Bastion wasn't hunting status. It was delivering balance. But something changed after Gavros Prime. The killing wasn't silent anymore. Wraith called it the turn. "It's not just punishment now," she said. "It's pressure." I didn't ask what she meant. I saw it for myself. The Ureth system collapsed in a single day, not from fire, but from fracture. 3 of their key planets seceded from council governance. Broadcasts flared up showing past war crimes committed against humans. Entire towns declared themselves neutral or sympathetic to Bastion. Riots broke out. Alien cities torn apart by their own citizens, students, workers, even military defectors who demanded answers, demanded justice, demanded truth. The council called it human manipulation. But the people knew better. The lies had festered too long. By the time the 14th name on the list was struck down, some former diplomat whose role in the Terran child reconditioning camps had been minimized in public statements, the cracks became canyons. I was on a transport hub called Sigma Verge when the real break happened. A council fleet, Ureth and Vossian combined, pulled into orbit. Officially for inspection, unofficially to root out sympathizers and seize any Terran cargo. They underestimated how many sympathizers there were. It started with whispers. Then someone shot a soldier, then another, then the power grid failed. And when it came back up, half the station was gone. Literally, torn apart by internal sabotage. Vents flushed soldiers into the void. Drones were reprogrammed. Explosives had been planted weeks earlier, strategically, precisely, methodically. The entire left side of the station collapsed into the planet's gravity well, over 12,000 dead. And a single message, painted in thick red across the surviving command center. "You do not get to forget us." I got out only because I wasn't supposed to die there. Bastion had agents on the station, hidden in the crowd, moving like ghosts. One of them pulled me into a service shaft minutes before the breach. I never saw their face. They just said one thing: "You're still useful." Then they were gone. After that, the galaxy began to devour itself. Trade routes shut down, council alliances fractured, trust became poison. Everyone was either a target or a traitor. Even species that had stayed neutral began choosing sides, not because they believed in Bastion, but because they feared being on the list next, because guilt echoes in cowards, and the stars were full of cowards. The Council, desperate to regain control, pulled its fleets from outer colonies. Every major world became a fortress. Curfews, surveillance, dissent criminalized. It backfired. When the people you've oppressed for decades finally see fear in your eyes, they don't run. They rise. Entire populations declared support for the Terran cause. Not because they loved humans, but because the enemy of their enemy had become something righteous, something unkillable. That was the brilliance of it all. Bastion didn't need to win battles. They made fear do the fighting. I returned to Shell 7 briefly. Found Soren drunk and laughing at a cracked screen broadcasting council propaganda. Something about resisting the Terran uprising. He poured me a glass. "They're late to the funeral," he said, slurring. "This war was over the day Earth went dark." They still think they can control the narrative. Let them. Their words are hollow. It's not about stories now. It's about memories. He was right, because everywhere I went, I saw the same thing. Memories waking up. Old Terran sympathizers crawling out of hiding. Children of refugees forming quiet networks. Non-humans who'd lived among Terrans, who'd loved, laughed, bled beside them, beginning to speak. They told their stories about the purges, the mining camps, the forced sterilization experiments, the education centers that rewrote human history to make Earth a villain. And suddenly, the galaxy was listening, because no amount of council broadcasts could stop the truth from bleeding through. That was Bastion's real weapon. Not ships, not guns, remembrance. I got a message from Wraith soon after Sigma Verge fell. One word. Soon. I didn't need to ask what it meant. The final phase was beginning. I traveled to a neutral moon called Harrow's Fall. Remote, cold, quiet. It was where the Council once held Terran defectors in black site interrogation. That site was dust now, but the memories still lingered. Bastion had turned it into a meeting ground. There were 5 of us, all ex-military, all Terran-born, all forgotten. Wraith arrived last. She laid out the plan. They weren't going to invade the Council. They were going to expose it. A single coordinated strike on a broadcast network that reached over 60 systems, not to kill, not to threaten, but to show the universe exactly what the Council had done. Records, footage, eyewitness accounts, proof, everything they buried, every crime they committed against Earth, and they wouldn't be able to bury it again. I looked around at the others. Tired faces, hardened eyes. None of us were heroes. We were just done pretending the galaxy was good. "We're not trying to make them love us," Wraith said. "We're making sure they never forget us again." I nodded, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something real. The plan would go into motion in 2 weeks. I left Harrow's Fall knowing the final storm was coming. Not a war to win land or glory, but a reckoning. One built not on conquest, but on truth sharpened like a blade. And when it fell, no species, no government, no empire would ever dare enter human space again. Because now they understood. We weren't victims. We weren't survivors. We were the reckoning they'd begged the stars to forget. There was no launch countdown, no trumpets, no battle fleets carving through the stars. It began with a flicker, a moment, one too short to notice unless you were watching closely. Every major broadcast channel, council-controlled or otherwise, flickered at precisely 2:07 Standard Galactic Time. Just a single, silent second of static. Then it returned to normal programming. Political debates, market indices, cultural shows. Most viewers dismissed it. Until it happened again. Exactly 27 minutes later. And then again. And this time, the static stayed. Every screen across the galaxy went dark. And when the signal returned, there was no anchor, no studio, no music. Just a face. Old. Weathered. Human. It was mine. My voice was steady. My name is Bram Halden, former soldier, former servant of the Galactic Council, a man who once believed in peace, until I saw what peace cost my people. I had recorded it 3 days earlier on Harrow's Fall. My face was chosen not because I was important, but because I was familiar. A Terran relic, a symbol of the forgotten. Behind me, the video shifted. It showed archives, real, unedited, untouched. Footage of Earth's dismantling, orbiting freighters full of stolen Terran resources, children pulled from homes, entire cities bombed for pacification. Interrogation chambers, genetic experimentation, starvation reports signed by smiling diplomats. The galaxy watched in silence. Because they couldn't look away. My voice guided them through each crime. This is what the Council built, not unity, not peace, control. And they feared what they couldn't control, a species that would not kneel, so they tried to erase us. Another shift. This time, the camps. Footage of Terran prisoners, malnourished, beaten, experimented on. Silent rows of women forced into sterilization wards. Boys turned into controlled drones by neurosplicing implants. Testimony from survivors, non-human doctors who defected and confessed. They called us volatile, dangerous, but the truth was simpler. They envied us. They feared what would happen if we stood equal. The broadcast lasted 27 minutes. It ended with one final message. White text over black. No species enters human space, because now they remember why they shouldn't. Silence followed. Not because the signal cut, but because the galaxy didn't know how to respond. I sat alone, deep inside a Bastion relay bunker, listening to the aftermath echo across 1,000 channels. Some denied it, others screamed for proof, but the smartest ones stayed quiet. Because the smart ones knew. It was real. Council HQ went into full lockdown, emergency summits, threats of cyber warfare, accusations of deepfake propaganda. But none of it mattered, because the people had seen the truth. Riots broke out in 7 major council-aligned systems within hours. Police stations burned. Military barracks were bombed from within by their own soldiers. On Chathar 9, a group of alien students occupied their planetary governor's estate and broadcast their own confessions, how they'd supported the council, how they'd stayed silent when Terran children disappeared. Across neutral worlds, Bastion banners began appearing. Not flown, etched, quiet, permanent, as if someone had taken a blade to metal and carved the message into the planet itself. I received one final message from Wraith. A data packet. Untraceable. Encrypted. In it, a list of planets where the Council had begun mobilizing for a counterstrike. A preemptive assault. They weren't going to wait for Bastion to strike again. They were going to strike first. Her message was simple. Let them. Now the people know. Let them show the galaxy who they really are. It was genius. Because Bastion didn't need to win a war of weapons. It had already won the war of memory. And the moment the Council's fleets opened fire on systems now sympathetic to the Terran cause, the rest of the galaxy would turn. The final death blow wouldn't come from humans. it would come from everyone else. I walked outside the relay bunker that night. The stars above were the same ones I grew up under, cold, distant, watching. But they didn't feel distant anymore. They felt ours. We had made them watch, made them remember, and now they were afraid, not of ships, not of guns, of truth, because the galaxy finally understood. You don't erase a people and expect silence. You don't build empires on bones and expect loyalty, and you don't betray humanity without consequences. The next part wasn't ours to write. The seeds were planted, the fire was lit. And for once, we weren't the ones burning. The Council opened fire. They struck the first worlds named in Wraith's data. Military dropships rained down on refineries, communication arrays shattered, fleets engaged. They bombed villages labeled sympathizers. They seized key planets. But the damage had already been done. For the first time, they were the aggressor, painted in their own crimes. Every system that flashed its coordinates in the data packet flipped overnight. Thousands rose up, uncloaking their allegiance to Bastion, identifying themselves not as human allies, but as human. Civilians, soldiers, even council officials turned their weapons against the strike forces. They captured bases. They exposed more evidence. They broadcast live testimonies, hacked council channels with photos of human refugees now welcomed, healed, reclothed. The narrative shifted again. And just like that, the council became the guilty ones. Worlds declared independence. Regional alliances fractured. Economies collapsed and reformed around human-neutral or pro-human coalitions. And for the first time in a century, Earth wasn't alone. They called it the Reckoning. And it wasn't a military campaign so much as a moral uprising, fueled by truth and vindicated by justice. In orbit above reformed Ureth Prime, I watched the Council flagship retreat. I was on a Bastion cruiser, sleek, black, silent. I stood by Wraith at the observation port. She gave no speech, no flourish. She didn't need to. The retreating fleet below said everything. They burned their own flags, literally. Ship crews threw council banners into space. Some starved them into covenants of neutrality. Some pledged allegiance to Bastion. They all did the same thing. They acknowledged who the galaxy now served. I asked Wraith quietly, "What now?" She turned to me, face hard and eyes sharper. "Now we rebuild," she said, "not to dominate, but to lead, to show a different path." I pictured the crucible underground, the sphere, the voice they never used. Not for bombs, not for domination. It was something else entirely, a weapon of revelation, to be used to force truth on those still willing to lie. I asked her about it. She just nodded and said, "We'll need it." Because after the reckoning comes accountability. Some of the human-born will lead, others will stand trial, the technology industry will shift, security protocols rewrite, interspecies treaties will be drafted in fire. The galaxy isn't peaceful again. Not yet. But it's honest. The final act occurred on the council grounds, the grand hall once used for peace debates, now cracked, scarred by protests and marked by human banners. I walked in with Bastion's truth delegation. Dozens strong, humans, Ureth, Voss, Gaveri defectors. They carried dossiers, memos, footage discs, legal documents, signed affidavits from survivors. The council sat across from us. Empty seats told the story. Many leaders were gone. Some fled, others mortally wounded by public outcry. I stepped forward. I don't think I introduced myself, because no one needed me to. The world already knew my face. The world already knew my stories. I laid down the charges, on paper and holoshow: starvation, genetic experimentation, mass silencing, forced disarmament, assault on planetary sovereignty. Each item was a line in the ledger of cosmic crimes. The council listened. They looked tired, broken, afraid. When I was done, I said, You stripped humanity of its life, its agency, its rights. Now it's time to give them back what you stole." Then everything stopped. The hall echoed. Votes were cast. Silence fell. Then, verdicts. Guilty on every count. Truth imposed itself across the room. The council meted out penalties. Seed fleets to neutral coalitions, universal reparations, creation of a galactic tribunal to oversee reconstruction. Key council members stripped of power, some sentenced to exile, others retirement. I stood among Bastion leaders as the sentence was read. No cheering, no fireworks, just quiet. A silence full of weight, then motion. Several former council officials, tears, relief, shame, walked forward to sign the treaty. A human delegate, young, female, wounded in one of the rescue missions, stepped up. She looked at the assembly and said, "We didn't survive so we could rule. We survived so we could live. We survived so we could remember." No speech needed after that. The hall nodded and gave her the pen. The world shifted again in that moment, not led by vengeance but guided by remembrance. I used to think victory would feel like triumph, like fireworks over the ruins of our enemies, like justice carved into the bones of those who betrayed us. But standing here now, staring down at Earth from a tribunal observatory deck, I realize victory doesn't feel like anything. It just feels quiet. No more broadcasts, no alarms, no military sirens howling through dark corridors. Just silence. Not the silence of fear, the kind that haunted the Terran colonies after the Council betrayed us, but the silence of settling dust. I walk the halls of the tribunal as an advisor now. Bram Holden, former soldier, former fugitive, former ghost, now a name inked on 100 testimonies, a witness. I was never meant to survive this long. Most of the men from my unit didn't. Those who did scattered to forgotten corners of the galaxy, trying to drown their rage in drink, in shadow, in exile. But fate, if it exists, had other plans for me. So I stayed. Not for glory, not for revenge. To remember. The tribunal is vast, bigger than anything humanity ever built before the collapse, constructed with stone and metal from every system that took part in the reckoning, a symbol of unity, of truth, but also of scars. You can still see them. The jagged edges on the eastern tower where Gavari engineers refused to smooth the metal as a reminder of their people's silence. The black ink murals painted by Urith artists, depicting the burning of Terran archives, overlaid with the faces of those lost. Even the walkways are uneven, not due to error, but by design. So no one walks in comfort here. No one forgets. I attend the monthly sessions, listen to the new nations argue over currency standards and trade routes. It's mundane, tedious, but it's peace, real peace, the kind you build from ashes, the kind that costs something. Not every species was ready for what Bastion did. Some still call us monsters, assassins, manipulators, and they're not entirely wrong. The truth broadcast broke more than the Council. It fractured entire civilizations. Families turned against each other. Cultures collapsed under the weight of what they had enabled. But those wounds are healing, slowly, painfully, and this time, openly. There are no more secrets now. Wraith disappeared 3 months after the tribunal's formation, left no trace. Some say she died. Others say she returned to the Crucible, training the next generation of Terran defenders, not warriors, but historians. She was never meant to lead the future. Her job was to end the past. And she did. Soran, my old friend, my drinking partner, my devil on the shoulder, opened a bar on a free planet called Halver's Reach. It's called the Ember's Wake. He serves soldiers, traders, diplomats, sometimes council washouts too. He keeps a blaster under the counter, and a Bastion patch over the register. I've gone to visit him twice. We don't talk much about the war, But sometimes, when it's late and the bar is empty, he pours us both a drink and says, "We didn't win, you know." I nod, because he's right. We just survived louder than they expected. Back on Earth, things are slower. Cities are rebuilt, not in steel but in care. Gardens where there used to be factories. Schools where there used to be bunkers. Children laugh again in the open. But the scars remain. Craters, walls with blast marks, empty shells of museums once bombed by council drones during the cultural purges. No one touches them. They stand like old friends at the edge of civilization. Quiet. Watching. Reminding. Earth isn't angry anymore. It's awake. Sometimes during the long nights, I take a walk along the old Atlantic ruins, what's left of the coastline that was drowned after the orbital bombardments. I walk alone. Not because I'm lonely, but because some memories demand solitude. The stars are clearer now. The orbital shields that once blacked out the night sky, Council tech used to track and suppress human signals, are gone. Torn down. Dismantled. And recycled into the tribunal's foundation beams. Some call it poetic. I call it necessary. Let them walk on the metal they once used to silence us. Let their children learn truth by standing on the bones of lies. The new generation. They're different. They ask why before they ask how. They read old Terran history. They question it. They don't salute the flags we died for. They plant new ones, smaller, gentler, wrapped in hope rather than fury. They don't want another Bastion. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe Bastion was a blade meant to be sheathed once the blood was drained. Not forgotten. Just put away. There are rumors, always rumors, that some rogue Terran cells still operate in the outer fringe. Fanatics. People who believe the reckoning didn't go far enough. That every non-human species should be punished for standing by while Earth burned. I don't agree with them, but I understand them, and I watch them. Closely. Because the truth is we're not above repeating history. No one is. That's why the tribunal exists. That's why we remember. Because once you forget, the cycle begins again. This morning I received a message, encrypted. No sender tag. I knew the style. Wraith, just 4 words. "You did it, Bram." I sat with that message for hours, stared at it, read it again and again, and I realized something. I never wanted to win. I just wanted to end it. The fear, the silence, the feeling that humanity had become a warning sign instead of a civilization. And maybe now, we're something better. Not a warning, but a reminder that you can't silence a species, that you can't rewrite truth with policy, that when you push a people into darkness, sometimes they don't die. Sometimes they become the fire. Final entry, my name is Bram Halden. I fought in the Europa campaigns. I watched Earth fall. I walked through the ashes of Mars and stood on the ruins of council arrogance. I saw vengeance, I saw justice, and I saw what comes after both. If you're reading this, remember one thing. The stars are not kind. But neither are they cruel. They're just watching, and they remember. Just like us. Forever.